I'll just stop and I'll just say, clothes racks, you know who I am, you see me here, just, let what needs to pop out, make yourself known. And they tend to do that, actually.
Take a playful look with Enfys Book as they roll for crit hits with pagan wordsmiths. Hi there, and welcome to 4 Quick Cues Book Talk with Enfys. I'm Enfys J. Book, and on this show, I ask pagan authors 4 quick questions chosen by a roll of the dice. Today, I'm super excited to introduce you to Brandon Weston, pronouns he, him, who is a folklorist, spiritual healer, and writer living in the Arkansas Ozarks. He's the author of Ozark Folk Magic, Plants, Prayers, and Healing, the Ozark Mountain Spellbook, and Granny Thornapple's Book of Charms. He's the owner of Ozark Healing Traditions, a collective of articles, lectures, and workshops focusing on traditions of medicine and magic from the Ozark Mountain region. He comes from a long line of Ozark Hill folk and works hard to keep these traditions alive for generations to come. Brandon, welcome.
Thank you for having me on. So excited.
I'm so excited to finally meet you. I have been so much enjoying reading Granny Thornapple's Book of Charms. It is such a delightful book. So useful, number one, like really practical magic and charms throughout, but also just so fun to read in a way that a lot of pagan books are not always this rich with story and folklore, and it's just a genuine pleasure to read, even though this is a tradition pretty far from my own practice. But that's also part of what makes it fun, is reading what other people are doing.
Yeah, this book was really fun to write, and so it makes me excited that other people are feeling the same way about it as I felt writing it, because with the folklore and everything, it was super fun to write out Granny Thornapple's story, and I'm really enjoying that other people are loving it too.
I think my favorite bit in the whole book is the dishwashing charm.
Yeah.
I thought was so, like, one of those lightning brilliant moments, and I think one of the ideas that weaves throughout the book is the everyday is magical, and you can turn just about anything into magic. And this idea of when you're washing the dishes by hand, you basically name them for people in your life that need healing. And as you wash it, you focus on them like healing and losing, the sickness or the thing that ails them. And I thought that's so brilliant, working your magic into your daily chores.
Yeah, and I think that is one of the things that makes the Ozark folk tradition kind of unique, is this idea that there really is no separation between the mundane and the magical, or the sacred and the secular, these things, that no matter where you are, no matter what you're doing at the time, you can connect to that, and you can use that as a practice. I always like to tell people that Ozarkers really like recycling everything around them. So, whether it's, using the plants that you've got growing around your cabin, or the spoon that you use to cook with, but that turns into a wand, or utilizing certain daily rituals, even it all kind of is this magic of daily life, and it's a really beautiful tradition.
That's awesome. Also, you and I have had the pleasure of working together recently on one of my upcoming books. You were gracious enough to be willing to contribute a ritual to the upcoming book of queer rites of passage rituals that will be coming out in the back half of 2025. And your ritual is so profound and juicy and interesting, and I just can't wait for people to read it.
Same. It was really fun to write.
Awesome. Well, shall we dive into the 4 quick cues?
Let's go.
The first thing we need to do is I need you to name our dice for today. This is a sort of magenta clear D20. What would you like to name it for the purposes of this interview?
I think I'm going to go with my favorite family name in my family, which was, back in the 1800s, Capitola.
Capitola. All right, I'm going to have to write that down because I may not remember that otherwise. Capitola. I love that. That is a great name. All right, so our first question is about spirituality, and we rolled a 17. Oh, this one's perfectly tailored for the kind of witchcraft you do. How does magic help you day to day?
Yeah, I think like I was saying earlier, it's this idea that magic is really a part of life itself. And I think for me, with my work, there are specific times that I set aside for specific ritual and specific healing work, things like that. I like working with auspices and with the rotations of the celestial bodies and all of this other stuff. But I think as far as my favorite part of the Ozark tradition is this idea of no matter where you are, you can connect to that innate power within yourself, and you can work whatever magic you need to work in the moment. And so, I've had times where I've been, out at work or in the grocery store, and, something will happen that I could, set aside, and I could go later and make a ritual. But, in the moment, it feels better for me to just sort of react to what's happening then. And I think that, the verbal charm tradition really sort of lends itself to this type of magic because a lot of things are memorized. And so, yeah, I don't know how many times I've been like, I don't know, in shopping for clothes or something, and a verbal charm will come to mind to address something in the moment, whether it be like a strange feeling I have or an encounter or, whatever it might be. And so I think for me, incorporating magic into my life is, recognizing that magic is my life itself. And so, just as often as I can, reminding myself or being aware that in this moment, that I am in that flow and that flow is in me.
I have to ask, when you're shopping for clothes, do you have a find it in my size charm?
Oh.
Because I need that.
I'm a big fan of talking to inanimate objects. So I think for me, I do this a lot where I'll just stop and I'll just say, clothes racks, you know who I am, you see me here, just, let what needs to pop out, make yourself known. And they tend to do that, actually.
Does stuff fall on the floor immediately? Like, oh, there's the one for me.
Sometimes, yeah. No, I did that one time. I was shopping for like the perfect pair of hiking boots, and I was just not finding what I needed to find. And so I stopped and I said, it was almost like addressing like an audience watching. And I said, you all see me, you all see my feet, you see my body. If you want to come home with me, let yourself be known. And I took 2 steps and a pair of boots fell off a shelf. And they weren't in my right size, that pair, but the style in my size, I still have those boots actually. And that was 10 years ago.
Okay, I'm going to use that. That's amazing.
Yeah.
I love that so much.
Talk to those objects around.
All right. Absolutely. All right. Question 2 is about writing Capitola. Ooh, a natural 20.
Nice.
You got a critical hit. Critical hit! What do you love about being a writer?
So I think for me, the writing process is a way for me to work through a lot of feelings and emotions I have about the subjects that I write about. So, I write about the Ozarks. It's a part of my family heritage, but there's a lot of not so great things wrapped up in Ozark heritage. And so for me, being able to sort of work through this and write about the things that I love and address the things that I don't love is a healing process for myself. So that's a big part of the process itself. But then, the stuff that I write about is, hasn't really been written about, and at least hasn't been written about for 70 years or so. And so for me, the writing process is really an important way to not only just teach people, but it's a way for me to be able to sort of awaken interest in other people, especially people who are from the Ozarks or people who have family from the Ozarks and now they're sort of disconnected. And so for me, if I can help somebody sort of connect to this and deepen their practice or discover their practice, I feel like I've been successful as a writer. And those are really the times that really make me excited, is when, people will say, I live in California, but my grandparents were from the Ozarks, and I feel more connected to them now, and I feel like I have something that I can practice now. And so that really makes me happy, more so than just, collecting the information for collecting's sake, which a lot of times folklore kind of gets into that territory. For me, it's always been really important to collect, but collect to be able to further that living tradition.
Yeah, I have to tell you, I had your book sitting out on my end table in my living room when I had some new friends over on Thursday, and I didn't realize that two of them live in Arkansas. And when they saw that book sitting out, it's the only book sitting out in the living room, their eyes just lit up and they like held it up and were like, "This is so cool!" So yeah, I think it means so much, especially to people from that region. But I also learned a lot from it that I can incorporate into my practice, which I thought was really cool. It's really made me rethink how I do magic and how to weave magic into, like there's no such thing as the mundane, like just weaving into everything I do. I really like that. All right, so question 3 is the not necessarily writing specific professional questions. Capitola, what do we have? 11. Rave about someone else's book, not mine. What is something great you have read recently?
Oh, wow. Let's see. Well, okay, so I'm going to rave a little bit about a book that I contributed to, but that I absolutely love. It's the Llewellyn's Anthology of American Folk Magic, North American Folk Magic, that I did write the Ozark chapter in. But even if I hadn't have written a chapter in that book, I would have gotten that book and I would have read it cover to cover, which I have. And it's an amazing book. I think coming from a folk magic background, this is the book that I would have cherished as a kid. And to go back to the writing question too, this just made me think of that. But a part of how I write is I always write for me as a child too. So the books that I would have wanted to read as a kid to connect to, I want to write those, and I want to make that sort of information available now. And I think that having an anthology of American folk magic, specifically North American folk magic, is there are so few of those out there, especially the types of traditions that are represented within the book, which a lot of them are minority traditions that are dying out. And so just to be able to have a compendium where practitioners and people that are a part of these cultures and love these cultures are able to then write and share about these cultures and help preserve them is, I think, amazing. And as a folklore nerd, of course, my favorite is going to be a folklore book. So yeah, that for me, I think the past couple years has been probably the most influential on my own development of how I approach folklore from a practitioner standpoint.
Yeah, I have that one as a reference book on my shelf, and it's really great that it was all pulled together from so many different traditions. I think a lot of people can find stuff to connect with there. And I'll include a link to that book in the show notes as well for people listening. All right, we come to our final question, which is the random encounter question.
Random encounter question.
And this is where I roll the d20 with a friend that is a d4 to find which of 80 questions I'm going to ask you. So let's see, we've got a 9 and a 1. This one's a thought-provoking one. What's the best decision you've ever made?
Oh, wow. Yeah. I think for me, the best decision was how the first book I wrote, Ozark Folk Magic, really came into being. I've told this story before, but I started off more from an academic standpoint, where I wanted to be the folklorist on the ground, preserving things for archives and collections and things like that. And I was working on a manuscript at the time that was a sort of reflection of this. But I was a little frustrated with the process and where I was going. By that point, one of my beloved teachers had already sort of identified the gift within me. And so I was starting to, learn and practice some things. And so I was really frustrated with the work I was doing, and a very, very, very talented worker and a friend of mine, as I was explaining this manuscript to him, he just said, "Why are you talking like you're not a part of this?" And at that moment, something shifted, something changed, because it was a realization that, I am a part of this. I'm an Ozarker. I'm learning these practices. So from that point, I scrapped the manuscript. And I think within 2 months, I wrote the entirety of both Ozark Folk Magic and the spell book, because they were originally going to be one book. And it was the best decision I ever made, approaching this material and approaching these stories from not just an outside perspective, but actually from someone within the culture itself. And from that point, my purpose was really being able to not just collect healers' stories and practitioners' stories, but being able to give them a voice in the outside world, being able to tell their own stories rather than people on the outside telling stories about them, which has been, the case for the past 100+ years. And so that, I think, was the best decision. If I had gone with that original manuscript, I actually, at this point, don't think I would have even published anything. Changing all of that and making it for a wider audience, for an audience of practitioners primarily, or people who are interested in that sort of stuff, I think was the best decision I made. And every time I see this friend of mine, I'm always like, thank you so much for that very short but very cutting criticism.
Yeah, those tend to stick with us for a while, and sometimes for the better. Excellent. Well, those are the 4 quick cues. Brandon, thank you so much for being here. I would love it if you could tell our audience about anything you're excited about that you have going, that you've got coming up, any conferences you're teaching at, workshops, upcoming books, current books. The floor is yours.
Yeah, so I have a website. I always like to plug that, ozarkhealing.com. It's really a repository for all of the Ozark healing tradition stuff. And so I have an archive of free class recordings on there. Basically, every class I've offered virtually since 2020 is free to download there. And it also has all of my schedules of upcoming events and things like that, and a great contact form if anybody has any questions or wants to get in touch with me. I also have an Instagram at Ozark Healing Traditions that I'm pretty active on.
Awesome. Well, we'll include all that in the show notes, and so people can visit your website and find out more. Well, thank you so much for being here again, Brandon. This has been a delight to get to chat with you, especially after our conversations we've had related to the other book, and such a delight to read Granny Thornapple's Book of Charms. Thank you for putting such a fun book and such a useful book out into the world. And thanks so much. Thanks to you, the audience, for listening to my weird, nerdy little dice-based interview show. Coming up, we have Estrella Taylor on our next episode. And if you enjoyed this episode of 4 Quick Cues, Book Talk with Enfys, be sure to like, subscribe, and leave a review on your podcast app of choice. Check out more content from me, Enfys, at majorarqueerna.com. That's MAJORARQUEERNA.com. And whatever time it is where you are, have a fantastic day, and may the dice of fate roll well for you.
Thanks for listening to 4 Quick Cues.